While we're often critical of CNN, they did a pretty good investigative report into the shooting and the death of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Now, she is an Al Jazeera, or was an Al Jazeera reporter who did her reporting in Israel, and while she was doing her reporting, she was gunned down. And following her death, there were attempts by the Israeli Defense Forces to basically claim that the Palestinians did it, even though there was no evidence. And obviously, if there's any group that would have more of a motive, it would be the IDF. And also witnesses on the scene claimed that it was a sniper with the IDF. Well, CNN has now confirmed that it was in fact the Israeli Defense Forces. So here's how CNN performed their investigation. They apparently spoke to 8 eyewitnesses who disproved the Israeli government's claim that Abu Akleh may have been killed in a crossfire between Israeli armed forces and Palestinians. A 16-year-old who was among the group of men and boys on the street told CNN that there were, quote, no shots fired, no stone throwing, nothing, end quote, before Abu Akleh was shot. Then we hear from another witness, Salim Awad, a 27-year-old Jenin camp resident, told CNN that there were no armed Palestinians or any clashes in the area, and he hadn't expected there to be gunfire given the presence of journalists nearby. And to be clear, she was clearly wearing, a vest that said press on it. It was very clear that she was a journalist. Now, the eyewitnesses' testimony also implicates Israeli armed forces in Abu Akleh's killing. So for instance, Jamal Huwail, a professor at the Arab American University in Jenin, who helped drag her body from the road, said he believed the shots were coming from one of the Israeli vehicles, which he described as a new model which had an opening for snipers because of the elevation and direction of the bullets. And also several eyewitnesses told CNN that they saw sniper rifles sticking out of the openings of IDF vehicles before the shooting began, but that it was not preceded by any other gunfire. So I mean, look, I think this is an important update, and while I'm often critical of CNN, when it comes to like the people who do the investigations and do the on the field reporting, they do a good job. And I think this is an important update to share with you, just to make sure we're abundantly clear about what really happened. And by the way, the Israeli government is not doing its own investigation into this. And I would argue, John, that if you are innocent, you would want to do the investigation to prove your innocence. But they're not interested in that. Well,
they talked to the IDF, and the IDF said they didn't do it, so no criminal investigation. They have some sort of procedural investigation, but not a criminal investigation. Yeah, CNN clearly has the resources, the connections to do these sorts of investigations. That doesn't surprise me that they were able to get all this information. The fact that they cared to is the part that actually surprises me. That they would report their findings is unexpected. I like this. Everyone click on that link to encourage them to do it more in the future, I would say. What effect this will have, I can't imagine what it would. I doubt Israel is going to change anything. First of all, they're going to say that all these sources are completely biased. That someone at one of these camps said something, they're not going to care. One of these academics, they're not going to care. Will this potentially cause any US-based politicians to reconsider? No, probably not. It's nice to know the truth. I believe the truth has its own value, but I don't know what I would expect to come from this, except that it is good that CNN was willing to do it in the first place.
Well, okay, so here I come with a little bit of optimism, which is really uncalled for and not characteristic of who I am.
Yeah, it's a bit offensive, honestly.
Yeah, you should be. But the reason why I'm a little optimistic, let me just reiterate, a little optimistic, is because the point you made about CNN covering this or investigating this in the first place is an important point, and it's true. Like, it stands out because I don't know if they would do this investigation like, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I just feel like there has been a shift, and it's incremental. But every time war breaks out, every time there's another egregious case of violence toward Palestinians or whatever it is, I feel like the media does a better and better job at covering it. Whereas before, there was either no coverage at all or just refusal to admit to the fact that Israel has now carried out an apartheid state. Now all of a sudden you're hearing apartheid state in corporate media, and it's kind of shocking. Like, not because I disagree with it, it's because it's accurate, and I feel like the corporate media really went out of its way to cover that up or prevent that from being reported, you know?
Yeah, well, it helps that you have some politicians who are finally on the national stage willing to say that. I maybe to play devil's advocate against what I just said and your optimism, because again, it offends me to see it in you and I want to stamp it out. It is a journalist who was killed. It's close to home.
That's true, yeah.
So their ground-based journalists in the area are going to be sensitive to the idea that they could potentially be targeted. I doubt that they would, but I mean, if it was just an activist, if it was just a migrant, would they have done the investigation? I don't know. Also, she's American, she's Palestinian American. If she, so these are the sorts of things that make me sort of guess. But they did do the investigation, so again, yeah, that's good.
No, that is a totally valid point. I was gonna mention that myself. And I think it was last year, everything is kind of a blur, so I apologize. But when the Israeli Defense Forces decided to basically target that tower, the media building.
I think it was last year.
It was last year,
Everything's a blur, I don't know.
Everything is a blur, but I mentioned that because Al Jazeera operated out of that building, but so did the Associated Press. And so I think that your point is an incredibly valid one. But if that's what it takes for these reporters to do their jobs, fine, I'll take it.
Yeah, they did it.
They did it.
They did it, that's good.
According to the Israeli army's initial inquiry, at the time of Abu Akleh's death, an Israeli sniper was 200 meters away from her. So there's more evidence than eyewitness testimony here. CNN asked Robert Meyer, a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Montana State University, to analyze footage. He concludes that based on the footage, the sound of the gunshots indicate that whoever shot Abu Akleh was between 177 and 197 meters away from her.
How is that possible?
I don't know, he's kind of, he's either
amazing.
Full of it or he's amazing.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, he sounds smart. Like, he's a professor of electrical and computer engineering.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that.
I was an electrical engineering major very briefly in college.
I don't blame you.
One really bad semester.
Yeah. Anyway, please read the report. We'll include a link in the description section for you to read the full investigation from CNN. And again, I commend them for doing this. I think it's important to do these investigations and to follow up on these stories. That's the other thing. Oftentimes they don't follow up at all. So to follow up with an investigation, I'm happy about that.
Exactly.